last expansion, we delved deep into the catacombs to discover new and interesting cards. Some classes grabbed powerful creatures or spells to include in existing decks, while others found whole new strategies. Dragon Priest is one deck that was in a very interesting place going into the catacombs, and came out with a brand new variant. New cards like Dustbringer, Corridor Creeper, and Spiteful Summoner created a new variant for Dragon Priest called Spiteful Priest that's more reliant on tempo rather than an OTK combo. The deck does something that's very uncommon for Priest decks to do, a minion-focused tempo deck. While it's nothing new for Dragon Priest, it has been a while since it's been considered a tempo deck. But with new cards like Dustbringer, it brings the tribe back into the forefront. While the Dragon package is interesting, it's only half the deck. A Spiteful Summoner summons a minion that costs the same mana cost as one of the spells in your deck. Spiteful Summoner will pull one of two large spells, because there are only spells. Getting rid of cheaper spells that are more common in Priest decks allows you to make sure Spiteful Summoner will hit one of these large spells to get max value. The minion-based Dragon package is the way we achieve this goal. Because we have a minion-based early game, we don't need small spells. There's two standard builds for this deck out there, one that uses Prince Keliseth and the Pirate package, while the other focuses on early 2-drops like Fairy Dragon, Netherspite Historian, and Shadow Ascendant. I'm going to be mainly talking about the latter, but the vast majority of information applies to both of these decks. Let's start from the top. Full playsets of Spiteful Summoner, Mind Control, and Free from Amber lets us play with those big boys. Like I mentioned, Spiteful Summoner will either summon an 8 cost or a 10 cost minion. Being able to do this on a strange turn for your opponent will put them off guard, maybe forcing him to use a kill spell early, or catching them after a turn where they used a lot of resources and now are unable to deal with this new threat. However you look at Spiteful Summoner, it's one of those cards that will give your opponent a headache. While Mind Control and Free for Amber are mainly here to trigger Spiteful Summoner, they also play a very interesting role. Free from Amber is the ultimate free card, letting you pick the best minion for any situation. Having the option to get an Oblivion statue to get more health, or the Lich King for more card advantage. While Mind Control takes a minion from your opponent, doing this against Cube Lock and getting their Cube or a Void Lord takes away a lot of their fuel. Fairy Dragon, Netherspite Historian, Duskbreaker, Twilight Drake, Cobalt Scalebane, and Dragonoid Operative rounds out our Dragon package. This is a powerful toolbox, and has been for quite a while. But it's interesting to take a closer look into why we want these cards. Dragon Tribe cards trigger when you have a dragon in your hand. Netherspite Historian, Duskbreaker, and Dragonoid Operative all require this and give us powerful effects. Duskbreaker is a true new all-star, being able to deal a 3 damage board wipe as early as turn 3 or 4. This means if you lose tempo in the early game to a zoo deck, you can easily reset the board in your favor. Netherspite Historian and Dragonoid Operative give the deck card generation. You can use this to pull minions or spells from outside of the game to fill in holes in your strategy. Cobalt Scalebane is here because it's a powerful board presence that needs to be dealt with. Having this stay up will wreak havoc on your opponent. Twilight Drake is another dragon that's a good tempo play, while Fairy Dragon is an early game dragon that's extremely difficult to deal with. Northshire Cleric and Cabal Talon Priest are pretty standard card choices for most Priest decks. If left alone, Northshire can generate crazy amounts of card advantage for you, while the Talon Priest helps buff up an early minion for even more control. We also bring a playset of Tar Creepers. There's not much to say about this guy, besides he does what he does and he does it well. Shadow Ascendant is an interesting card in this deck, as it lends to a playstyle that Priest decks tend to not go for. It is, however, exactly the type of playstyle we are going for with this deck. Playing Northshire Cleric turn 1 into this turn 2 is pretty great. They will need to answer the Ascendant quickly, before it runs away with the game. In that respect, it's a lot like Cobalt Scalebane. If they can't deal with it on turn 2, playing a Tark Creeper or a Cobalt Talon Priest can be used to protect it, and if God forbid they're able to deal with this early game pressure, we can use Duskbreaker to reset the board in our favor. The last two card choices are Bone Mare and Corridor Creeper. Both these cards were runaway smashes from their respective sets. Bone Mare gives some added defense and powerful aggression, while Corridor Creeper is a large threat that can be cheated out early. I know it's redundant for me to spend any more time with these guys, especially if you've played any amount of Hearthstone recently. You probably already know the power of these guys. One last mention for a card that really isn't standard, and that's for Grand Archivist. Some people don't run him, while others cut a Twilight Drake to add in a single copy of him. At the end of your turn, he casts one spell from your deck. That means he'll get a free Mind Control or a free from Amber at the end of each turn. Normally this only happens once, because leaving him up is a really stupid thing for your opponent to do. The card is a little hit or miss, which is why some people decide not to run him. While playing to find footage for this video, I personally ran him and found that he was not only great fun, but much better than I originally had thought he would be. But he is definitely not a must include in the deck, just something you should consider. As with most decks, you want to mulligan for low cards, and chuck all the high ones. Don't want to see any of those mind controls. No. Northshire Cleric, Tark Creeper, Shadow Ascendant, Fairy Dragon, Cobalt Talon Priest. That's where it's at. Past this, the mulligan is far more interesting in this deck than in most others. There's more thinking going on here than what appears at first glance. Going up against an aggro deck, you should always keep Duskbringer. Because like I've mentioned before, playing him on turn 4 generally kills anything that's been played up to this point. If they're a board-centric deck, they're going to be wiped out. Corridor Creeper is another one you might want to consider. Its ability benefits only stacks when it's in your hand, so having it in your hand as early as possible is beneficial. If you get Netherspite Historian in your opening hand, take a second thought about throwing away any of those other dragons. Because remember, you need one of those dragons in your hand to trigger its ability. Odds are you'll have a 1 in 3 chance to draw a dragon later on, but that's not a 100% guarantee that you'll draw one within 2 turns. Not a huge deal, but it is something to consider. Because you won't be drawing a whole lot, Twilight Drake will almost always be a 4/5 when played on curve, so consider keeping it, but it's far less useful on the draw later in the game, when maybe you only have 3 cards in your hand. Lastly, let's talk about Spiteful Summoner. Keeping her is great, as she is one of the largest win rates when kept in this deck, but comes with a big footnote. Let's say you get her, Mind Control, and Bone Mare in your opening hand. We are definitely going to be throwing away Bone Mare and Mind Control, but if we decide to keep Spiteful Summoner, we run the risk of getting 2 other large cards. 14 of our 30 cards in our deck are filled with cards that cost 5 or more. We run the risk of screwing ourselves in the early game. Keeping Spiteful Summoner can and will blow out games, if played correctly. Really think about your mulligan, the odds of what you will draw into, and how you will temple out. The deck is pretty popular sitting around tier 1 or tier 2. The decks that this deck is good against are slower control decks. Big Priest, Control Warlock, Secret Mage, and Jade Druid all have trouble against this deck, while fast decks like Zulok, Aggro Paladin, and Murloc Paladin are all able to outpace your tempo. This is mainly why Duskbringer is so important. Getting him off will change a deck that you were meant to lose against to a possible win. The deck wins against the vast majority of the decks out there right now, but loses to just about every other tier 1 deck, putting this in a strange limbo state. Bully on slower decks like Big Spell Mage or Control Warrior, while trying to dodge all those aggro decks. It's hard to see where this deck is going to go from here. As long as the majority of people are playing control decks, you're going to do great. If not, however, it's going to be a tough road ahead. Now, it is a cheap deck at only 2,860 dust to craft. Much of this comes from epic cards like Corridor Creeper and Spiteful Summoner, while everything else are rares and commons. The only tricky one to get here is Netherspite Historian, which is from an adventure. While she is a powerful card, you can definitely find substitutes for her. If you have patches, you could consider running the version I mentioned earlier that includes him and Dread Corsair. Other substitutes for this deck include Curious Glimmerroot and Twilight Oculant. If you really feel like showing those Cublock what's up, put in Kobold Song Stealer to silence them, or even a Gelatinous Ooze if you find a lot of weapons in your matchups. Finally, Galactica Crawler is here for those tempo rogues that have started popping up lately. I wanted to focus on Spiteful Summoner herself one last time. I wanted to talk about this deck because of this card and its possibilities. While the Priest deck is the most popular deck this card is included in, you can put her in just about any deck. Aggro Druid removing all their spells besides Ultimate Infestation, Midrange Hunter adding in Call of the Wilds to trigger her, Aggro Paladin running the Summoner with Dino-sized, Pirate Warrior has even been spotted including her with Lesser Mithril Spellstone, Zalay was even throwing around a Cthulhu Druid that ditches all the early game mana generation spells, replacing them with cards like Greedy Spirit and Mire Keeper to add in room for her and Ultimate Infestation. The point here is that you can take this concept to a lot of places. These aren't just decks that are fun to play, these are all decks with positive win rates. These are fun decks that have the potential to win. Take a look at these decks to add a little spice in your life. Who likes big minions? I know I do. And Spiteful Summoner is here to give them to you. Hop on the value train and see what station the Summoner will bring you to. Thank you for watching my video. If you want to see more, please subscribe.